Okay, I think that I will start sharing my screen, so we could be starting with this with this webinar series. Well, and as many of you know, this is the third webinar of this first series that has been organized and developed by the PsIP. And well, the main objective of this series was to increase the knowledge and to disseminate information related with the phytosanitary irradiation. That's why we called this session Phytosanitary Irradiation, Understanding and Unlocking the Potential. Well, and please let me allow the people to enter right now. So yeah. Then, going through this, you know that, for the ones who doesn't know what is the PsIP is, well, PsIP is let's say a young group of professionals that somehow are related with the use of phytosanitary irradiation. And the main objective is to increase the knowledge, to disseminate information, education related with the phytosanitary applications and the use of the technology for this application. So in this first webinar series, we had 3 webinars. Today is the third one, but we had at the beginning the first webinar with Ivenon, IIA's board member and advisor, in which we had a quite general introductory webinar. Then we had the second webinar with Sally Ormiston from the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry of Australia, where we had quite an interesting point of view from the Australian perspective related with regulation. And this third webinar, we are going to have the pleasure of having Laura Jeffers today with us as a guest speaker. She's going to be presenting some information about the USDA APHIS PPQ phytosanitary programs. So we are going to have Laura today. And while the recordings are available of the first and the second webinar in the Information Hub section at the PsIP website. So if you miss some of these webinars, you could go and join easily to to check again the recording, so you could be you could have more information about that. So for not taking too much or too many minutes from the webinar today, let me introduce you Laura Jeffers. So Laura started her career in insecticide development at around Poulenc, as you're seeing there in the screen. In 2007, she joined the USDA APHIS Plant Protection and Quarantine section as a biosurveillance analyst. In 2009, she joined the PPQ Treatment Quality Assurance Unit. And in that position, Laura was the business system manager. And in 2015, Laura joined the PPQ field operation as a national operations manager. And now in 2023, Laura moved to the PPQ pest exclusion and import programs. And now she's a senior risk manager there. So we are going to be having Laura today with us. And also before starting, I wanted to let you know that after Laura's talk, we are going to have a question and answer session as we did in the previous 2 webinars. So if you have any questions, you can go to the question mark that there is in the Teams webinar screen. Or if you cannot type it or you cannot find it, please, you can type your questions in the chat option, so we could be asking your questions to Laura at the end of the talk. So without more, not taking too much time from the webinar, I will leave you with Laura. So Laura, if you're there, you can start, share your screen, and it's all yours. You're muted, Laura.
There we go. Doss, let me start out by saying thank you to the PsIP for putting this together and allowing me to come on board. And again, thank you for also putting all of these lectures online, because some of them were at weird times for me. So that was great to go back and be able to watch them. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So I am here to provide a perspective for the United States on phytosanitary irradiation. I got a little sentimental as I was putting this talk together, because I realized that irradiation and I have had the same 3 phases in PPQ. We started out and it was a very sort of a technical challenge. We were dealing sort of with what we could and couldn't do from a technical point of view. I started out in science and tech. And then really after that, it was how on earth are we going to start doing this? What are the operations that we're going to need and the documents that we need to create, and how we're actually going to work with CBP and get this all sorted out, which is when I moved to operations. And now I've moved to policy, and I really feel like it's time for irradiation to graduate to that next level of quarantine treatment. It's established, and now it's really time for us to kind of go in and start looking at those regulatory nuances to make sure that the industry and our treatment providers and our regulators are all on the same page. We speak very different languages. We're not always in the same race at the same time. So really, it's just now we're just really going to take advantage of the technology that we've implemented and really just see what we can do to improve all of our phytosanitary programs. So again, I'm Laura. I'm with USDA APHIS PPQ. That's our National Plant Protection Organization for the United States. And I am now in policy. So many of you I will know from my previous roles, and I'm always welcome to take a call or an email. But as my role has changed, I might have to direct you to somebody else within PPQ. So just let me know and we'll help you find the right person. All right. So today, kind of following that, I kind of also wanted to break this talk up into 3 different pieces. Again, that early phase, where did this all come from? Because a lot of that is why we are where we are now. And I hope that makes a bit more sense in a few minutes. And then finally, where I really want to spend the time talking with you, and I'm hoping that this is where we spend a lot of our time for the question and answer session, is what are we doing now looking forward? So what are the obstacles that we still have in front of us? Because they're new. These are not the obstacles we had 10 years ago. And what are the resources that our treatment providers and our industry folks and have access to? So again, being a regulator, you're sort of in a weird position that you can't provide sort of recommendations for next steps for industry. But what we can do is we can direct you to information that will help you make those decisions. And then we can help you establish what you want to do, making sure you are in compliance with all the regs that we have in place. So teamwork, and let's go ahead and get started. So let's go back decades and decades ago. The USDA, our focus was very different, right? So we started with trade with our top agricultural exports, right? Soybeans, corn, tree nuts, wheat, cotton, the fresh fruits, and then distillers grains, believe it or not. These are always, in some order, our top plant-based agricultural exports. And if you know anything about the history, is that usually when you have an export program or even a domestic program, that you have control measures in place very early on. So these are really established markets. So going way back, there was an evolution, a co-evolution of the export domestic markets and the pesticide labels that we had. So if you go and look at our methyl bromide label or one of our phosphine labels or some other sort of chemical treatment, you'll see that there are allowances for all of these things. And the work has been done to ensure there's little to no phytotoxicity when you're using these treatments. So for many, many, many years, methyl bromide was our sort of regulatory quarantine treatment silver bullet. And I have no problems with methyl bromide, but if there are better technologies available, we should embrace those. Again, it's creating a diverse arsenal of tools for us to use as regulators and with trade. And again, like methyl bromide will have a place in that, but we need other things too: cold treatments, radiation treatments, heat treatments. We want to be able to accommodate whatever happens at a port of lading or a port of entry. And this is one of our PPQ animal photos of some of the early fumigations we used to do in ship stores. Again, also in the early years, we really, because of that co-evolution of the label and of the export markets, we didn't need really anything for our own stuff. But one thing that we really don't produce are tropical fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So here you see a colleague of ours in Thailand as we're doing some mangosteen inspections, right? And again, we started using irradiation for commodities like mangosteen, where either we didn't have a label, a chemical label that we could use to treat for the pests associated with that commodity, or it wasn't tolerant to a cold treatment or tolerant to a heat treatment. Irradiation was really the only option we had. And because of that, and because of our trading partners wanting to start exporting these high-end, kind of more valuable tropical fruits to the markets they were developing in the United States, all of a sudden, irradiation was needed. But it was met with some eyebrows, right? Because it's such a paradigm shift, especially for folks that deal with AQI and quarantine treatments. Quarantine treatments up until a couple of decades ago were always mortality as the endpoint. So if you do a fumigation, you kill the bug. You do a cold treatment, you kill the bug. You do a heat treatment, you kill the bug. But if you irradiate something, you're not necessarily going to end up with a dead bug. More than likely you will. And in fact, there's only one time I've ever seen anything be irradiated commercially and have a live pest on it at the end. There are other endpoints, though. We can do sterilization, reduce fitness, and ability to emerge to the next life cycle or life stage in the life cycle. Really, again, it's one of the most flexible things that we have going for us, but also it leads to some interesting conversations when you start talking about how you standardize research for radiation treatments. But that is a different topic, so maybe we'll talk about that later. So again, as this was all happening and, we were kind of fumbling around, obviously we don't have those tropical products, so we're not used to dealing with them, and, our regs aren't really supportive of doing that. And again, we just don't really know a lot. But one thing we did very, very, very right early on was that we created very robust, flexible regulations that have really given irradiation a big leg up as it pertains to quarantine treatments. We do not really have precedents like this with fumigations, cold treatments, or heat treatments. And we'll get into that a little bit as we go through this talk. But again, early on, we had FDA, one of our federal counterparts. They went ahead and they said, okay, all fresh fruits and vegetables are okay for insecticide infestation. Great. We started trading domestically. So Hawaii had all these gorgeous tropical fruits, and, high-end tropical fruits have really become one of those luxuries that the average person can afford, and so why not, right? So we found a way to start transporting that to the U.S. mainland without any, mitigating all the risks associated with that, those particular commodities. And then all of a sudden we started toying around with things like generic doses. Generic doses, that might be really the reason why we're going to be as successful with this as we will be in the coming years. And then also finally, we started trading internationally. our colleagues from Australia beat us by a couple of years, but that really just has snowballed, and we are really seeing great gains with our U.S. imports using irradiation, regardless of the program that we're using to bring it up. So getting back to that sort of what I was talking about, generic absorbed doses, the real exciting thing is that normally when you're developing a phytosanitary treatment schedule, you develop your market access, and then all of a sudden you have to stop, and then you have to develop a treatment, whether it's cold treatment, fumigation, heat treatment, and you have to do all this efficacy data, and you have to look at the pest in the commodity with the treatment. It can take years, it can take decades. It is not an easy process. It is definitely a labor of love, and something that we did routinely when I first started. But now that we have irradiation, we have these generic doses, we see that your commodity or irradiation is really commodity independent. It really only has to do with the density. So all of a sudden, we're able to assign our mitigation measures quickly to new markets. And it really expedites that process. So depending on what the pest list is, we may have a solution right away, and that could be irradiation. So again, huge advantage for this technology. So that wraps up the first maybe decade or so. And what we saw early on and what we thought were our issues turned out to maybe not be the issues that we thought they were. Very quickly, we started seeing acceptance in the regulatory space of irradiation. Again, it was a real paradigm shift. So some of our more established colleagues maybe struggled with that. They struggled with the concept of, a live pest. How would we handle inspections, and what happens if some kind of pest got into a domestic trap, if it would initiate some sort of quarantine response. And honestly, none of those have really been an issue. So very quickly, we saw this comfort building. And I think one of the things that really led into that is that we were very careful to create a really good trace forward and trace back process. So let's just say there's a fruit fly detection in California. We can be very careful about, or we can be very diligent about providing the data of what has come into that area and using irradiation, and how we can ensure that that treatment is done efficaciously, and all of the record keeping is in place. So one of the big tools that we use for that is our irradiation reporting and accountability database. We can take a piece of fruit from the area that it's grown to the packing house, to the whatever transit it takes, where it is treated at the irradiation facility, and then who are the responsible parties for it. Plus, we have all the information about the treatment itself. And we can share it with those folks that have concerns. I've got some new data to share with you later on today about volumes. But really, this has led a lot of especially our state colleagues to be more comfortable with this. And then also the labeling. Like, a lot of people kind of gawked at all the labeling requirements early on, but that has really led to great flexibility, not only at the ports of entry as it comes in, but also when it moves domestically, if there are additional requirements from state to state. That's not our regulatory purview, but we try to be respectful of that. So, and then of course there were other problems that we had, but I hope you guys are big Jurassic Park fans. I'm sure there are a lot of Gen Xers on this call, and this defined a lot of us. And one of my favorite parts of that movie was life will find a way, right? Well, industry will also find a way. Industry always finds a way if they are motivated. And one of the big issues we had early on was pest-proof packaging. It was such a nightmare. We started with, and I just realized I missed an arrow there. We started out with these really I'm not going to say ridiculous, but I'm going to say complicated and maybe and definitely cost prohibitive packaging requirements, because that is just sort of where we were at the time. This is what we could kind of vet and what industry could provide. But believe me, if you have every cargo item coming in and you have screens glued to each hole and every seam taped, yeah, that is just not something you want to set a program on. So after that, again, industry will find a way. They sort of come into us with some different ideas. One was, hey, you know, you're a pallet irradiator. Like, we have a pallet irradiator. We can actually treat pallets. Could we use our pest-proof packaging at a pallet level? Yes, you can. Again, we work closely. I believe this was our Sterigenics facility down in near Mexico City. They created these bags, and we were able to start running these through. They saved time. There were no additional risks to us from a pest standpoint, because again, everything is kept in that pest-proof packaging. We maintain that integrity until it's cleared in the United States and the inspections are done. Well, you know, that works for a lot of places, but if you are maybe a smaller cobalt source, or you have e-beam, maybe you can't use that pallet level pest-proof packaging. So very quickly after that, we started seeing perforated bags that would be used within boxes. So again, you're moving back to a box level for pest-proof packaging, but you are creating a much easier operational process to complete. And one of the cool things about this is, on top of all of this, we've had some very clever folks that have said, hey, since we have this pest-proof packaging here and there are perforations there, do you mind if we also try and use modified atmosphere packaging? And the answer is, yeah, with the right information provided to us, we can allow that. So industry has moved from this archaic way to now having shelf life extending, box level perforated packaging that like creates a modified atmosphere. Like, and this was all on them. This is all on them. This is, you know, and this is why I love the work that we do, especially in PPQ, because we're not a traditional regulatory organization. We're really a trade facilitating regulatory authority, and we really want to help people achieve our mission, but our mission is to facilitate safe trade. So we want to help industry get around these hurdles safely. So here we are. Now we're still in the present, and you know, we started off with the sort of domestic quarantines with those shipments from Hawaii. And then again, we started with our pre-clearance program, where we were irradiating in places like Mexico, India, Vietnam, Thailand, and then bringing that stuff into the United States. Well, very quickly, we added 2 programs in recent history. So kind of phase 2 of phytosanitary irradiation for USDA. We added our offshore program, which is still irradiating commodities in the country of origin. And then the upon arrival, or used to be called port of entry irradiation program, and that's where we bring in our imports, but we wait to irradiate them until they get here upon arrival, hence the name. So that comes with its own unique challenges. I'm going to be spending much more time talking about the upon arrival program, because I really feel like this is a tremendous importance for the future of this program. And I hope you'll all understand why when we're done with this. But just real quickly, so you guys have an idea what we're talking about scope-wise, is so our pre-clearance programs right now, we are treating in India, Mexico, Thailand, and Vietnam at facilities in those countries. And we send PPQ officers or have foreign service nationals monitor those treatments. South Africa is kind of grayed out here, because we used to have a certified facility, but that is no longer in use. But it's still a program that could be, you know, brought back up, but not at the moment, but we have the records on file. And Mexico has got a little asterisk because it actually is really interesting because it does both upon arrival and pre-clearance treatment. So exporters and importers that deal with Mexican commodities have a flexibility. They can do it in country, they can do it here upon arrival. So that is, again, something that we can help industry navigate. And scrolling down here. So here we have our offshore program. Now, it's got an asterisk on this one because technically this is a trial or pilot, if you will. This is, again, very similar to our pre-clearance program, except our Australian counterparts monitor those treatments. So it's so far it's been really successful. Of course, like I said, the Australians have been doing the international trade thing longer than us. So if there was a good place to start and try to figure out how to solidify this program, it was them. So great efforts there, and yeah, looking forward to the future of that program. And then domestic. So again, we started with the sort of Hawaiian tropical fruits coming to the mainland. We now have 2 facilities, one in Oahu, one in the Big Island, and they treat a multitude of things. And it's really great to see how flexible they can be about how they do the work. But on the other side, because all of those pre-departure things, those are, or the domestic pre-departure things, those are condition of entry treatments. So we know that we're going to have to use that schedule in order to bring it to the US mainland. Emergency actions? Oh no, those are like what they sound like in an emergency action. So we had a fruit fly outbreak in South Florida. And again, we had a multitude of commodities that were growing in that area that could not leave that area. So a lot of those products like peppers and tomatoes and whatnot were on the methyl bromide label, but things like dragon fruit and some of the Annona species that were burned down there aren't. What do we do? Well, we created a limited permit, moved that stuff over to Gulfport, Mississippi, we irradiated it, and we saved those seasons. And it's something that we bring up regularly with Florida, because having this technology or capacity in your area is also great. It's another tool if something goes wrong. And having a fruit fly outbreak in an area like South Florida it's a knockdown thing, right? It's going to require lots of coordination and expense in order to not only allow those markets to move out of those areas, but just to get rid of the pest itself. So irradiation slipped right in there and saved the day for a lot of people. So anytime that we can replicate this, we really should. Export program. Don't really have a lot about this one because this is one that we have really not spent a lot of time with. And we can talk about that's one of the things we can talk about after in the question and answer series or session if you want, is why we have struggled with exports. It has a lot to do with, again, what we produce here and what we have available to treat. But we did have some small successes back 10 years or so with stone fruits to Mexico. We had done some, Chapman University with a task grant had done some quality studies, and it had kind of appeased the growers in South Carolina and Georgia. And they said, okay, let's try this. And so very quickly, we got Mexico to kind of sign off on using Gateway America. That would be sort of like an equivalent of an offshore treatment for them, because we were providing the monitoring for the treatment, and then it would be exported to Mexico. And then the next year it went to B'nai B'Yan, which is kind of like an upon arrival irradiation program for them, because it's our cargo going there and being treated once it gets there. So that was really interesting to kind of see how that all played out. It's like backwards day, to be honest with you, when you work with stuff like this, because imports is just really so different from exports, believe it or not. But having those quality studies that were done because of this have been really helpful for conversations with interested parties. Again, quality is not our regulatory purview. It's something I keep abreast of, but obviously that's not my focus, but it is an interesting part of the conversation. So let's end by talking about the upon arrival irradiation program, because this is, like I said, this is really where we need to sit and think as we talk about the future, because this is the capacity building program. So this all launched back around 2010. We were working with a treatment provider in Sioux City, Iowa, SADEX, and they were really gracious with us to help us find a way to bring in Pakistan mango and irradiate it here upon arrival. And we went to a lot of places and they were just not in a position to be able to help us. So we still are so grateful for SADEX because it provided the precedent that we needed to move forward. So unfortunately, this did not take. We had a number of shipments come over and were treated successfully, and everything was just really great. But what comes down to it is there was just some difficult logistics, and then there was a catastrophic crop failure the next year, and then they lost some logistics, like they lost flights from Islamabad. So they just couldn't bring it in the route that we had agreed upon. So, but yeah, but this was an important precedent. And then just a couple of years later, we had a big giant rule change that allowed us now to establish upon arrival irradiation facilities in the lower and western states. So that was a game changer, really. That is when the upon arrival program really just was like, here we go. Now there are some additional requirements that I won't really get into now, but again, there's lower pest risk up here in the white states than in the green states. In the green states, because the conditions are different, the threat for the introduction, establishment, and spread of exotic pests are just greater. But very quickly we started having a lot of interest from industry, and so we certified the National Center for Electron Beam Research, an e-beam facility in College Station. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that. That was back in 2012. Gateway America came right on board right after that. They were certified in 2013. They're a cobalt-60 facility in Gulfport, Mississippi. They are kind of one of our guinea pigs. We really appreciate how great they are. And then of course, with NCEBR, we've got Suresh Pillai, who's a wonderful advocate for this technology, and we're very appreciative of the work that he does with that as well. And then our newest kid on the block, last year we certified Redeem, which is an e-beam facility down on the Texas-Mexico border. And they call their process electronic cold pasteurization. So that's the name of their center down there. And this was a really big deal because, to be honest, a lot of our facilities weren't what I would call placed with port of entry, sort of AQI ports of entry in mind. Sioux City, Iowa and Gulfport, Mississippi are not bustling AQI ports. And of course, that means ports that bring in a lot of imported fresh fruits and vegetables, like perishable stuff, right? That require inspection and, condition of entry, whatever's. So this will be interesting because they're going to have to struggle with different dynamics. They're going to have to deal with the ridiculous volumes of cargo that come in. That border is difficult to time. Usually when you have a different, when one of our other participating facilities, the timing is a bit buffered because it's going to be a lot, right? But this is really difficult to time. And again, anytime anybody's ever had any experiences at the border down there, yeah, there are a lot of unknowns. So plus there are a lot of fruit fly issues down there. So they've got that extra extra burden to kind of worry about, but we're looking forward to see what these guys do. They originally kind of started with the Mexican, obviously Mexican commodities coming across the border, but they've branched out to doing some other ones, Peru, pomegranates, I believe, and maybe a couple other ones. So, you know, I'm just glad because we really need the capacity right now. And again, so we're talking about right now, right? And so what I really want to make sure everybody understands is that this is all ridiculously trade facilitating and capacity building, because look at all these different commodities that we can bring in. So there's a whole list of them here that I'm not going to go through, but like these are all things that you can treat upon arrival. These are all small markets that really can't justify the country of origin really investing and creating that irradiation infrastructure to support this market. But they can come here, use our resources, establish that market, and decide, yeah, we're going to go all in on this, and we're going to bring those treatments back to us in the country of origin, back to them in the country of origin, and again, invest that money, save some money along the way, and then we're happy because the risk is moved offshore. Like anytime we can mitigate risk offshore, that's the way we want to do it. But we do understand that it's expensive to get this stuff up and running. So this is the program that allows that. And these things are highlighted because they may or may not be in the works. Any of you who keep an eye on the Federal Register will have seen some activity with those three commodities. This slide usually takes a lot of time for me to go through. I am not going to do that today because again, we're talking about what we're doing right now, and I feel as if there have been a lot of strides to sort of streamline these processes the best we can. So it takes a lot to get something from a concept and then to actually doing the treatment using irradiation. So you've got to go through all these steps if you want to bring in an import using irradiation. But the one that I've got highlighted here is the framework equivalency. We've struggled with framework equivalencies. A lot of time, like back in the early years, we kind of felt like they were a bit of a sort of a trade barrier almost because people were nervous about them. Well, I'm happy to report that that's becoming less and less of an issue. It's becoming more and more routine. Our conversations with our trading partners are getting shorter and shorter about this. So these are all the ones that we have signed up until now. So you can see there's a number of countries that are comfortable with this concept. I've got Chile highlighted because I got really excited because I was crunching a bunch of numbers for this meeting to share with you. And I got to crunch the Chile fake data for the first time because that was something that was exciting. All right, so here's the new stuff. Let's talk program totals, okay? Again, there are things we can and can't share because we do not want to share any sort of private or protected industry information. So some of this is really high level. I've tried to give you what I can. If there's something else you need, I've got a reference for you or a resource for you to use to get that information. But overall, our program totals are, of course, we're not doing any exports currently. So last calendar year, we brought in 48,000 metric tons of imports that used irradiation. And we used 7,000, or we had 7,000 metric tons of domestically moved cargo. If you switch over to kilograms, I'm going to break down the imports a little bit. So fleshing that out, if you break it down, you look at pre-clearance, the majority of our imports were done in a pre-clearance program. So 45.5 million kilograms. Offshore was, you know, a bit more modest, again, because we're just talking about Australia. We're just talking about a pilot. So 300,000 kilograms for that, for those commodities. And then upon arrival, again, this is the trade facilitating one. We had 2.5 million kilograms that were treated here upon arrival. We need to talk about this number. We're going to talk about this number at the end. If we want to look at by country, I've kind of broken it down for you like this, that right now, Mexico wins the contest for most exports to the US, right? Without question. They've got a really robust selection of things. The logistics are definitely a little easier than most countries that we trade irradiated goods with. And again, they've got the markets. Because a lot of these commodities, like mango, had been coming in for years using things like hot water treatment. So if you look at everybody else, you know, Vietnam, Peru, and India have a good little chunk of the action, but really everybody else is, you know, kind of added up to not much. Now, Thailand and the Dominican Republic are both countries that we have traded with and have started to trade with again. We all know I've never provided any 2020 or 2021 import totals or data at all because everything was just so messed up from the pandemic. And it's taken some countries a little bit longer to kind of recover from that, but Thailand is up and running as of yet, so we'll have totals for 2020. But again, 48 million kilograms are what we're looking at for all imports. All right, now if we go to commodity, here are all the commodity totals in kilograms, and this is for all of our programs. So this is domestic, import, and export, but we don't have any. So here are all the totals. So again, a total of 55 million kilograms treated. And if you break it down like this will kind of show you what's going on. You've got your guava and mango. This is, again, there's other countries that feed into mango, but this is mostly Mexico. Sweet orange, sweet potato, chili manzano, dragon fruit, pomegranate, and everything else together is 9%. Funnily enough, sweet potato is our is from the domestic program. That along with rambutan are the two most irradiated things for our domestic programs. So it makes me happy that this pops up here. The domestic program is doing okay. But yeah, so again, if you toggle back between these, you can really get an idea of what's happening where. All right, so we come to the end, and I've got some slides to share with you about looking forward. And again, this is where I get a little nervous talking to everybody because this is really where I have to be really careful about my role. I am a regulator. I do have certain things that I am like I can talk about, and certain things that I really need to stay away from. But I feel as if we can have a conversation about these things within limits. So let me go ahead and get started on this. And if you have any questions about any of this, you're always feel free to ask. You're not going to upset anybody, but I may have to pass you through a different resource to get the information. So first of all, we're looking forward. What are the challenges that we have? I think early on, everybody was really worried about that 1,000 gray maximum for fruits and vegetables that FDA had implemented. A lot of people spent a lot of time worrying about that. From our vantage point as a regulator, our facilities that are doing the work are able to do it. And why would we want to irradiate over 1,000 gray anyway for these products? Again, there's that sweet spot where you see benefits right around that phytosanitary dose. But if you go much higher than those phytosanitary doses, you start to see deleterious effects. So I've worked this one out. I'm not sure everybody will agree with me on that one, but I think that's the consensus in our organization. FDA labeling. Yeah, a lot of people used to complain about all that additional labeling that was required. But honestly, I feel as if, and I've seen this happen. So this is more anecdotal than technically supported. But people are kind of using those labels as a point of pride. These are very well managed programs and very effective treatments where you're creating a value added product with that treatment. Plus, I got to tell you, there's been a a zillion times that we have had to go look at those labeling information because there was a question that came up operationally as something was moving or there was an issue with a shipment. That saves us every time. Next one is consumer acceptance. I've also worked this one out. I'm sure there's a few people who disagree with me, but from our vantage point, people want what they want. And if it's only irradiated, they're going to buy that. People, like, again, for example, people that grew up in India want Indian mangoes. That's what they want. You know, people that grow up in Mexico, they want a Mexican mango, and they don't want maybe the hot water treated ones. A lot of us Americans don't mind the hot water treated ones, but a lot of people have said, and I've read, that they just, you know, again, they're not happy with the quality after the hot water treatment. So again, customer acceptance isn't really as big an issue as I think we're all thinking. I'm sure there's always going to be organizations that are not okay with this, but remember, this isn't organic versus treatment. This is all about managing pest risk. So if there's a pest risk, something needs to be done. And then regulatory acceptance, like, again, if you saw that list of our framework equivalencies and you see all these regulations and other countries really expanding their acceptance of this, yeah, we're in a good place right now. I've heard about other countries kind of establishing their own sort of best practices for adopting these technologies, and I'm so excited to hear what they come up with, because as somebody who had to do that for the United States, yeah, we learned a lot. We learned a lot. You learn from making mistakes, and we really are proud of what we have now. There's still things we need to do, and I'm sure there's going to still be mistakes, but we're on the right track, definitely. So also, final one that's, I don't think, an issue anymore, because early on, you gotta remember that they were days where we were begging to get any sort of allowance for upon arrival, and we were waiting for with bated breath to get just a single Mexican commodity that we could not only treat from pre-clearance but also upon arrival. And then look at us now. Like, we really, when we're setting up market access for new markets, irradiation is usually one of the first things we consider, because we don't have to worry about developing a treatment schedule to mitigate the risks with the pests associated with that commodity. That's the game changer right there. But let's move into things that we do need to work on. And again, these are not business decisions or recommendations for business decisions. These are just facts. And we can discuss them if you'd like. So I think one of the biggest issues that we have right now, because as somebody who's involved with this, I field calls all day, every day. Even in my new position, I'm still having to like field a lot of these calls, wanting to know whether or not irradiation is organic. And unfortunately, it's not. So yeah, we've talked a lot about FDA requirements that, FDA regulations and requirements that kind of may need to be considered. I think this is where a lot of people should focus their attention, just based on the calls that we're getting. I'm not getting calls about all of those other issues with strikeouts. I'm getting it about organic, and there have been a lot of the National Organics Program, which is another one part of USDA. They are really working really hard to ensure that sort of integrity of that stamp. And yeah, I think that is a place that the appropriate regulators really should focus on, and industry should support that any chance they get. One thing that is our job, fortunately, is that we really need to work with some of our state Department of Ag to really help them be comfortable and familiar with this technology, and to allow them to establish it in those southern and western states, because we require sort of sign off from the representatives to the National Plant Board, who usually are in the State Department of Agriculture. And that those allowances are basically allowing commodity either to make arrival or move through your state, because without that permission, we can't do that. And then also to establish those irradiation facilities in southern and western states. And then finally, give them information. So when they get pushback from their domestic growers, that political pushback, they can say, hey, let me tell you about that oriental fruit fly outbreak in southern Florida. Look what that technology did for that commodity. Wouldn't it be great if we had that in our area? And then the next one is we really start needing to maximize our capacity building with the upon arrival irradiation program. We need to look at where we can establish those new markets and help those countries create that need, that market, and then that infrastructure. And then as soon as that gets established, we need to push that back. I mentioned that before. We got to push those treatments back to the country of origin once they've been established. And then that way our upon arrival irradiation providers can start servicing new markets. And then we just continue to grow. And then the last couple of things, and again, this is where we get a little right on the edge of what's appropriate and not appropriate. But we need to educate industry about needs, phytosanitary needs. So not only the providers, but the manufacturers of equipment. We need irradiators that are designed to deliver a phytosanitary dose. We need irradiators that are strategically placed at high volume, ports of entry and lading, that focus on perishables. And we need inline and or like mobile irradiators for our own exports. Again, because exports are tough. Like I said, we could talk about that later. And then we also need to educate industry about the unique features of irradiation. That, of course, isn't necessarily focused on our manufacturers and our treatment providers, but our importers, our brokers. Again, there are some real value added things about this. And I think one of the biggest ones, because people talk about shelf life extension, but really all of that is due to you can really maintain that commodity cold chain. And, you know, folks that deal with logistics know that is the kiss of death if you can't maintain that for your expansion. And then last one here is, and again, this is me taking some responsibility, and is something that my team now in my new job are really going to try and perform better. But we want to educate regulators, ourselves and others, about perishable logistics. We have spent a lot of time developing markets, developing operational work plans, developing all these programs, and we don't always have the knowledge to assess things about transportation or how things are processed or packaged, or just the feasibility. Again, like those are things that, again, aren't necessarily under our regulatory purview, but we need to make sure that what we're providing is going to work in the real world. And I think there's some ways that we can do that. And again, bear with us. Like I said, we're moving into stage 3 now. We're really starting to nuance some of these issues. All right. And then finally, just to wrap up, I've got some resources here for you guys. Again, I can't always provide you everything that you want, but ACER, the treatment manual, irradiation imports, APHIS registry, and then Freedom of Information Act, people, if you want some information, and I can't provide it to you, go there. Be real specific about what you need. All right. Thank you very much. And I guess we can do questions now if you'd like to.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely clear. And it's quite interesting for the people that are connected today. I have some questions in the chat and also in the question and answer section. So if you don't mind, I will be just making this to you. So the first one says, it's from Thomas Elrich. He says, thank you, Laura, very educational. I have inquired about the capital cost associated with establishing an irradiation program, and 18 million is a struggle. Are there any incentive programs or government loans that you are aware of?
That's a very good question, one that I will probably defer to a different organization. But again, what I'd like to stress, it depends a lot on the origin of this cargo. If you're thinking of doing anything in another country for export to the United States, start with the upon arrival irradiation program. Make sure you have that market solidified before you put that in. I've seen a lot of people put a lot of time, effort, money, and then it's kind of fallen apart because it doesn't fit into the rest of the sort of perishable world, or there's some sort of regulatory or funding issue. So again, if it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're wanting to primarily export something, then I would first think about the market and using the upon arrival irradiation program, and then think about building that infrastructure in country. Now, if you're talking about building an irradiator somewhere here in the continental United States to do upon arrival, then we do not really have anything that I'm aware of. I do have some resources maybe that I can pop in the comment box later if I can dig it up. Oh, I think I just saw a comment from him. So the Carolinas?
Yep.
Okay. So if that's the case, then again, if you're not targeting anything specifically, like you're just wanting to look at that, before you do anything, you're going to want to put in a Freedom of Information Act, find out what they're actually treating in those locations. And I'll leave it at that. Because you want to make sure that the markets are there. All right. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Thomas, is that answering your question? If yes, you can put yes there in the chat. Meanwhile, I'm going to another question. Well, this is a comment from Arthur. Arthur is saying that I think, well, he thinks that regulators, yeah, Thomas says that you answered that. Okay, I will go back to Arthur's comment that says, I think regulators help drive the conversation to support harmonization and address the challenges. Then the standards committees and industry should get together to see how they can implement the needs or support the regulators in a change of perspective. I absolutely agree with that, and I think that could be quite a PsIP. Yeah.
You'll see that the regulators kind of stumble around in this space, like because of the limitations on what we can and can't do. But we can help you get the conversation going. And then, like I always tell my stakeholders, I'm going to back out slowly now and let you guys like do good things. So absolutely.
That's great to know, Laura. And well, Arthur has a question, and I think that we all have this question because it's quite of definition. What do you mean by organic?
Organic. Okay, so sorry if I kind of breezed across that, because the United States is obsessed with organic. So there are different certifications, but the one that in the United States that we see most commonly is the USDA National Organics Program certification. So they work with a number of entities, third-party entities that basically go out and look at processes to create or grow something, and they basically stamp it whether or not it meets organic requirements. And organic just means that you're not using any sort of synthetic pesticides or any sort of process or treatment that would constitute that, right? Now, again, cold treatment is a organic, heat treatment is an organic treatment, methyl bromide fumigation, sulfuryl fluoride phosphine, not organic. Irradiation is the one that kind of sticks in my craw a bit because it's light, it's photons. What's more organic than that? but because the regulations, and if you're interested, the FDA regulations are what we call Title 21, so it's 21 CFR, and I think the section that deals with organics is 9.26. Quote me on that, but it will be in there around that area because that's the irradiation statutes in there. But yeah, so like again, this was a long-standing decision and maybe one that should be reviewed. Again, getting something like that changed is going to be a huge cost for the government and industry. But you know, honestly, like I've seen a lot of people push for other FDA changes. I think this might be a good place for everyone to converge right now. You know, just again, consolidate efforts and really try to figure out best way to approach it, because honestly, that is a call I get all the time. Oh, can we irradiate organic products? No, you'll lose that certification. It'll basically uncertify it. Like, so it's not something that I would consider now, but yeah, it's a food additive and therefore constitutes non-organic status. So yeah, we can talk about that later too. At another meeting where we were all at. That's something, again, not our regulatory purview here, but we get a lot of questions about it. And then we do have, of course, our own concerns with the organics program within the USDA.
Great, thank you, Laura. That was a tricky one. Then I have another one. It says, hi, Laura, very informative session. So many things clear about irradiation program. I just want to know if there are any interception of pests upon arrival program with the community. What will be the action by the USDA?
What a good question. Okay, so that's something I get really excited about. So it depends on the program. So you have to understand that the export programs that or the import programs that we have with our trading partners, they are very careful to create commodities with a very high standard and have very low pest rates. So these irradiation treatments that are done are really just to catch the things that we can't get or things that are difficult to inspect for. And so if it's done in a pre-clearance program, it comes to the United States. It's usually not inspected, but because we have that pest-proof packaging on it, there is a quick inspection to determine whether or not there are any hitchhikers. And if they're hitchhikers, then we would mitigate those separately. They sometimes do like it's not really a traditional CPP inspection, but there's like a reduced irradiation pre-clearance and offshore program inspection. So they'll take a quick look at it just to make sure that there's nothing egregiously wrong with it. Now, when you get to upon arrival, though, so that's different, right? Because we haven't treated it yet. They do a more thorough inspection. Again, this Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they look for, again, hitchhiking pests on the outside of the pest-proof packaging, but they also look to see what else is inside of there. So they usually will have what's called either a sample pallet or a sample to look at, to remove that pest-proof packaging and look to see what's going on in there, not only to ensure that everything's packaged properly, but to see what else is there. If we find something, whether it's a hitchhiking pest or whether it's something that's inside of the pest-proof packaging material, if it's an insect pest and it's not an adult or a pupa of Lepidoptera, we have a treatment for it. And instead of doing a 400 grade treatment for a particular pest, we just do a 400 grade treatment and we take care of everything. So a lot of times we don't do anything different. Now, if it was a 150 grade treatment, we may have to bump it up to 400 grade. So again, we might have to do a little bit of like juggling once we get to the irradiation facility on arrival. But again, if it's something that's not, so say like if it's a mite other than Brevipalpus chilensis, or if there's some sort of like weird pathogen concern, or it's an adult of LEPs. Sometimes we can find other mitigation measures, whether it's a fumigation or a processing of some type. Our flexibility with that is much less. So it's great. The first time someone called me from Houston and said, "Oh no, we've got," forget what it was, some kind of mealybug on something, and we were already delivering a 400 degree dose. I was like, "Great, you don't have to do anything." But and we put that on the EAN, which is the when you intercept a pest and identify it, it was, we'll just have standard treatment. We'll, mitigate risks associated with this commodity. It's great. So yeah, and honestly, the new frontier is that if something comes in and you find a pest and it wasn't originally destined for irradiation, is using irradiation as a true emergency, a standalone emergency action measure. We've come really close to that a few times, but technically haven't done that yet. We've done it for a quarantine, but we haven't done it like at the port of entry. So that's kind of one of the things that I really want to look at.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura. I will choose 2 more questions because I think that we already are over the time. I have one question, but it's a really interesting topic. So I think that we need to take the advantage that we have you with us today. It says, well, from a policy perspective, do you distinguish between irradiation technology, I mean gamma technology, E-beam, X-ray? So do you distinguish between them?
We will consider all 3 forms, E-beam, X-ray, and cobalt. Those are all source types that we allow. But there are definitely challenges and advantages to each of those. So while we allow all of them, we are starting to get to the point where we do regulate them just slightly differently. And it can come down to things like how often we recertify it. Like if a cobalt facility reloads cobalt quite often, we would have to recertify quite often. But with an E-beam, as long as there's no major change to the structure of the facility itself or a major equipment change, we may not need to recertify. So there are little things like that, but overall, we are very welcoming of all source types. I've got my personal favorites, but I am not going to share those on here.
Yeah, you're going to cause a fight there, Laura. So I have another question, and there's thank you, excellent presentation. How is the public acceptance and the consumption of irradiated products evolving in the US?
So I like answering this one this way because, how do I put this? It's hard to define that or to answer that, but people want what they want. And cost sometimes drives decision making at the grocery store. But like, if I ever have the opportunity to buy a mangosteen, I'm going to buy it. I don't care if they've flushed it down the toilet, right? And a lot of other people are kind of like that. They want what they grew up with. So you're always going to have that fringe that objects to everything, And I think that no matter what we do, we're going to have that fringe. But what's more important than consumer acceptance is distribution and marketing acceptance. And if the grocery lines and all those folks, the marketing folks, adopt it and provide it to the public, they'll ultimately make the decision about consumerism. But I have trouble getting my hands on stuff. I actually go visit friends in Pennsylvania just to go to Wegmans, well, also to see them, to see if I can get any of the irradiated products there, because I love what Wegmans has done with their value added sort of, especially with the mangoes. But yeah, so like right now we have not saturated the demand, because there are large parts of the United States that we don't even see those commodities yet. And they want, like Indian mangoes, Pakistan mangoes, dude, those are already bought before they leave. Like a lot of these commodities that we're buying are already purchased when they get here. It's completely different. I mean, we're also talking about volumes that are much smaller. Like if you were to compare these to like Chilean grape, Peruvian asparagus volumes, it's apples and oranges, right? Or not. But it's a very different conversation. But like I said, consumer acceptance is not something that's on my radar anymore. It is what it is.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And well, I will do the last question. And well, if there are any questions that stayed in the chat, we are going to be answering them in the future. So I will choose this one because I also found this really interesting from your presentation. It says, why are upon arrival irradiation program volumes smaller than the pre-clearance irradiation program volumes?
I was hoping someone would ask that. So yes, the reason for that comes down to just operational logistics and resources. So we started with the pre-clearance program because we found treatment providers that could fit us in, right? A lot of those were cobalt-60 facilities. So, you know, those things need to run around the clock or they're just losing money, right? So they were also able to treat at larger configuration volumes, so pallets. So we early on were able to establish, and in Mexico, obviously, and then Vietnam, Thailand, and India, some pretty high volume markets, because one, we were dealing with cobalt, because again, I'm not saying that E-beam and X-ray can't hold volume, but it depends on where it is. You know, again, it depends on where a facility is and what the source type is. So right now, if you look in our pre-clearance programs, our facilities are placed near packing houses. So there are like, it's just operationally easier to execute, right? And then not only that, we have a PPQ and our trading partner relationship that's focusing on this, right? With upon arrival irradiation, it's the wild, wild west. And as the former sheriff of that program, I will tell you, it's supported very differently. We're working with importers. We're not working with the trading partner. We're not working with our NPPO colleagues. We're working with importers. I'm sure some of you know a few importers. It's different. Trade discussion and importer discussions are very different. One is based on the regulatory world, and the other one's based on money, right? So different conversations. And unfortunately, the thing about the upon arrival irradiation program is there's not as much, we just do not have the resources to handle the volume. We're maxed out in upon arrival irradiation. We're maxed out. We are now begging facilities to do things to take stuff. Like we really need more facilities. We need them in the right places, and we need them with the source type that allows inline treatment. So again, import volumes for the kind of commodities that we are moving on to. If any of you are ever near a port of entry, look at the scale of volume. We're moving into the big arena now, and so we just don't have that in upon arrival irradiation. We need that. So there are a lot of companies, some of them may be on this call now, but that are looking at some of these areas. And again, we are excited to work with you. We don't do them ourselves. Obviously, sometimes people are like, can you build a facility here so I can import? We don't do that. I wish we did, but we don't do that. But we will work with industry for them to navigate the murky regulatory waters, because we know it can be difficult. So yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you, Laura. And well, the last one, because I think that some people are not really clear with the terms. What is the difference in offshore and pre-clearance?
So they are the same thing. They're both U.S. imports that are treated in the country of origin. all the differences is just who provides the monitoring of the treatment itself. So if it's pre-clearance, that's us. Either we send folks over for a detail, or we have Foreign Service nationals monitor those treatments. With offshore, it's our NPPO counterpart. So in Australia, we have the Australian NPPO monitor those treatments for us. And of course, that requires, that is just a pilot right now. We do not have the regulatory authority to establish that permanently, but it will definitely require much more stringent metrics for involvement than either a pre-clearance or not, like a pre-clearance program would.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I think that we are going to end with the questions. And okay. Well, thank you so much for your help. This has been really useful for us. And for all of you that are connected, we are going to be uploading the recording into the PsIP website. I will also send you when it's done, an email saying that it's already done, so you can go there and look at it again if you want, or if you missed a part. So there is going to be the information. And well, once again, I would like to thank you everybody for joining the PsIP at this first webinar series. This is the final webinar of this series, but we are going to be having next webinars more. So please keep paying attention to the announcements of the PsIP. And also, if you can join PsIP, you can join them by free, and you can access to all the material that we have, because our purpose is just to increase the knowledge in the phytosanitary irradiation area. And so we'll be really glad to have you, all of you there in the community, so we could continue sharing information and having, I don't know, nice discussions about this. So thank you all so much. And in the name of the PsIP, I thank you everybody for joining and for your interest. Thank you all, and thank you, Laura. See you later, everybody.